My name is Kendra. I'm a 28-year-old Black woman, and I work as a junior project coordinator in Chicago, Illinois. This is my story.
My name is Kendra. I'm a 28-year-old Black woman, and I work as a junior project coordinator in Chicago, Illinois. This is my story. I used to think that honesty on a resume was the best policy. I had written fluent in French under my skills section, and for 3 solid months after I was hired, I became the absolute laughingstock of my entire department. To them, I was just a diversity hire trying to sound sophisticated, someone who fabricated qualifications because she thought no one would ever check. They saw my degree from a state school that lacked Ivy League prestige, tossed my resume into the metaphorical quota bucket, and assumed my presence was just a drop in the corporate ocean, making no real waves. My hiring was treated as a bureaucratic fluke. And that line about French, among a sea of bland, cookie-cutter corporate profiles, it was glaring and, to them, hilarious. So I became a living, breathing exhibit for their amusement in the break room. During lunch or right after clocking out, I could hear the whispers. "Hey, did you see Kendra today? The one who claims she is fluent in French." "Yeah, I saw her. Not exactly screaming corporate material, is she? But the attitude on her is huge. I heard she barely passed her community college Spanish class, yet she claims she can speak French. Does she even know how many letters are in the French alphabet? People like her will just lie about anything to get a foot in the door. She is just trying way too hard to fit in." Those words buzzed in my ears like persistent flies. I could not swat them away, and I could not hide from them. I wore thick framed glasses, outdated thrifted blouses, and practical slacks because that was what I could afford. Every single day, I sat in the darkest, most isolated corner of the open plan office, quietly doing the grunt work. I organized files, formatted spreadsheets, and handled the menial tasks that the senior coordinators felt were beneath them. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not even show a flicker of emotion. I knew exactly how corporate America worked for a Black woman. If I spoke up, I would immediately be labeled as aggressive or hostile. If I defended my credentials, I would just be told I was not a team player or not a culture fit. In their eyes, I was a liar, and any explanation would just be more fuel for their microaggressions. My world was reduced to the clatter of my keyboard and the hum of the office printer. What my smug coworkers did not know was that every 2 weeks, when my direct deposit hit, I paid my minimal living expenses for my cramped apartment in the suburbs, put gas in my beat-up 10-year-old Honda Civic, and immediately transferred the rest to a hospital billing department. My mother was battling a severe illness, and the American healthcare system was draining us dry. Out-of-pocket maximums, denied insurance claims, and copays were burying us. My pride and my ego were absolutely worthless compared to my mother's life. I needed this job. Even if I had to crawl on my hands and knees and swallow every ounce of disrespect, I was going to anchor myself here. Today started like any other day. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Chicago High rise glared down on my desk, illuminating the dust motes floating in the sterile, heavily air-conditioned air. But there was a strange, suffocating tension gripping the entire floor. Our director of sales, Brad Vance, a textbook embodiment of corporate white privilege, who always wore $1,000 suits and sneered at anyone below his pay grade, was pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Sweat was literally beading on his forehead. His expensive leather shoes slammed against the hardwood floors, creating a frantic, chaotic rhythm. "Where is she? Did you get her on the line? Keep calling. Do not stop calling until she answers," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the floor. "Brad, I cannot get through. Her phone is going straight to voicemail. I even tried her emergency contact." Tyler, his administrative assistant, looked like he was on the verge of a panic attack. I walked past the eye of this hurricane, carrying my cheap break-room instant coffee. I knew exactly what was happening. The executive delegation from our parent company in Paris had arrived a full day earlier than scheduled. The company had shelled out a massive amount of money to hire a top-tier, specialized corporate interpreter. The hourly rate was astronomical. And yet, at the most critical moment, this highly paid professional had completely vanished off the face of the earth. In the main glass-walled conference room, a group of very severe-looking French executives had been waiting for almost 30 minutes. Their initial polite smiles had completely dissolved into overt, freezing impatience. Anyone in the office who knew even a single word of French had been dragged in to attempt communication, but it was a total disaster. The French executives were traditionalists. They refused to conduct business in broken English and stubbornly stuck to French. To say the sales department was panicking would be an understatement. The entire company was acting like the apocalypse had arrived. I noticed Madison hiding near the water cooler. Madison was the golden girl of the office, the one who weaponized her fragility and initiated the most vicious gossip about me. Her face right now was a mix of schadenfreude and absolute dread. Of course, she was terrified. If this multi-million-dollar partnership fell through, everyone's annual bonuses would evaporate into thin air. Brad's cell phone suddenly rang, and he practically lunged to answer it. A few seconds later, the remaining color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. I guess that was the confirmation that the interpreter had officially bylaid. He dropped his phone, stumbled back a few steps, and leaned against the glass wall. His desperate eyes scanned the room full of clueless, terrified employees. The air was dead silent. Everyone was holding their breath, terrified of becoming the target of his wrath. Into that deathly silence, I slowly walked toward him, still holding my cheap mug of coffee. The smell of the bitter, burnt roast mingled with the sharp scent of collective corporate panic. I looked right at his face, which was twisted in absolute despair. My eyes behind my thick glasses were unnervingly calm. "Brad," I said, my voice not overly loud but steady, "maybe I should give it a try." In that split second, the atmosphere in the office froze completely solid. Every single gaze full of mockery, shock, and suspicion suddenly pivoted and pointed directly at me like a firing squad. Brad froze. His bloodshot eyes stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. It was as if he had never seen me before, this invisible black woman who had been doing his department's grunt work for 3 months. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before a sharp, mocking laugh sliced through the heavy air. "Are you out of your mind, Kendra?" Madison stepped forward, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, the heels of her designer shoes clicking aggressively. "Do you even understand what this meeting is? These are the senior executives from Paris. You went to some no-name public college, and you think you can be a corporate interpreter. Are you just so desperate for attention that you have lost your mind?" Her voice was shrill, deliberately loud enough to carry to every corner of the floor. She was attempting to put me back in my place, using the same corporate hierarchy she always hid behind. "Yeah, Kendra, stop playing around. This is not the time for your jokes. What if you insult them? Who is going to take the fall for that?" "Brad, do not listen to her. You know she exaggerated her resume." The chorus of agreement swelled from the peanut gallery. Coworkers who usually treated me like I was invisible were suddenly rushing to stand behind Madison. They looked at me like I was a delusional clown about to drag the whole department down into the mud with my incompetence. Their words rained down on me, cold and stinging, but inside, I felt an incredibly strange sense of total serenity. I just quietly held Brad's gaze. I knew the power resided entirely with him in this moment. Right now, he was a drowning man, and I was the only life preserver floating in the water. He didn't know if I was real or just an illusion, but he had to choose whether to grab on or sink to the bottom. His face shifted through a spectrum of colors, from pale white to flushed red to a sickly gray. I could see the internal calculations, the risk assessment happening in real time. If he trusted me and I failed, his career was over. If he ignored me, his career was over anyway. Suddenly, the sound of a heavy chair scraping against the floor echoed from the conference room. The lead French executive had completely lost his patience and was standing up, preparing to walk out. That sound hit Brad's frayed nerves like a sledgehammer. He gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with the reckless desperation of a gambler pushing all his chips to the center of the table. "You, come with me." He hissed the words through his teeth, shoving his way through the crowd of employees and marching toward the conference room. "Brad, wait," Madison yelled, stepping forward to intervene. Brad turned and shot her a glare so venomous it could have killed a lesser person. "Back off, Madison." I quietly followed him, feeling the daggers of dozens of stares piercing my back. Madison's eyes were practically burning holes into me, her gaze screaming, "You are going to destroy yourself, Kendra." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale, oppressive office air, and pushed open the heavy glass door of the conference room. The sheer pressure of the room hit me instantly. The lead executive from France, Monsieur Laurent, was a man in his late 50s with impeccably styled hair and the rigid posture of old European money. He was already on his feet, and his two assistants were grabbing their briefcases, ready to bolt. His face was a mask of classic Parisian arrogance and completely unhidden disgust. Brad instantly hunched his shoulders, adopting a submissive posture, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. He started stammering in broken, pathetic English. "Sorry, very sorry, gentlemen." Monsieur Laurent frowned deeply and cut him off with a sharp stream of rapid, incredibly irritated French. Brad stood there looking like a deer in the headlights, wringing his hands awkwardly. The conference room was dead silent. I walked over and gently placed my cheap coffee mug on the table next to an empty leather chair. The soft clink of ceramic against the polished wood broke the tension. Every eye snapped toward me. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my thrifted blouse, lifted my chin, and met Monsieur Laurent's judging gaze head-on. Then I spoke. "Monsieur Laurent, au nom de notre entreprise, je vous présente nos plus sincères excuses pour ce contretemps." Monsieur Laurent, on behalf of our company, I offer our most sincere apologies for this unexpected delay. My voice was clear, calm, and perfectly modulated. Every syllable was flawlessly pronounced, carrying the exact intonation of native Parisian French. Time seemed to stop completely. Monsieur Laurent, who was halfway to the door, froze in his tracks. A look of profound shock washed over his icy blue eyes. He slowly turned around, his piercing gaze examining me from head to toe. His two assistants froze as well, exchanging bewildered glances. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Madison and the rest of the peanut gallery standing absolutely paralyzed. Their jaws were virtually on the floor. The sneer had not even fully left Madison's face before it froze into a mask of pathetic, comical disbelief. Brad was standing there like a statue, staring at me, then staring at Monsieur Laurent, his expression cycling through sheer panic and sudden, blinding hope. Monsieur Laurent slowly sat back down in his chair. He crossed his arms, leaned forward slightly, and looked at me with an entirely new expression. It was a look of deep intrigue and genuine respect. "Mademoiselle, vous parlez un français remarquable." "Miss, your French is absolutely remarkable." I offered a slight, measured smile and replied effortlessly. "Merci, monsieur, c'est un honneur." "Thank you, sir, it is an honor." I knew right then that I had conquered the first hurdle of this massive crisis. The heavy glass door swung shut, physically and metaphorically blocking out the prying, hostile eyes of my coworkers. Brad slumped into the chair next to me like a wooden puppet whose strings had been cut. He was breathing heavily, staring at me as if I was an alien being that had just beamed down from a spaceship. I, however, immediately locked into professional mode. Monsieur Laurent began detailing the specific objectives of their visit and the expectations of the parent company. His cadence returned to the brisk, highly technical rhythm of an executive boardroom. I pushed aside every distraction, my brain firing on all cylinders. I captured every nuance, every complex engineering term, and smoothly translated it back into English for Brad. Monsieur Laurent explained that they were extremely interested in the preliminary technical proposal our Chicago office had submitted. However, he noted that the application parameters for the new composite materials seemed far too conservative. They needed hard, aggressive testing data to prove the material's viability under stress. As I translated, I rapidly jotted down the key metrics on my notepad. Upon hearing the English translation, Brad jolted upright as if waking from a nightmare. He frantically flipped through the binder in front of him, panic sweating through his designer shirt. This specific question was entirely outside the scope of what he had prepared. He stammered out a weak, pathetic corporate deflection. "Tell him we will supplement the data reports after the meeting." I translated his non-answer. Monsieur Laurent frowned again, and the atmosphere in the room began to cool rapidly. I watched as Laurent tapped his index finger against a specific structural diagram on the blueprint, his eyes lingering there. That was when my memory triggered. When I was first hired, they treated me like a glorified filing cabinet. I was forced to organize mountains of archived technical documents. Among that trash pile was an internal, unsanctioned lab report regarding this exact composite material. The engineering team had scrapped it from the official proposal because the data was considered too experimental and risky. I didn't even wait for Brad to make things worse. I turned directly to the French executive. "Monsieur Laurent, concerning that specific structural input, I believe there is a slight misunderstanding." I paused, ensuring I had his full, undivided attention. "Actually, we possess an alternative internal framework. Our laboratory stress tests indicate that if we make a minor adjustment to the joint angle and increase the curing temperature by exactly 5%, we can boost the tensile strength of the composite by 15% without compromising its flexibility." I spoke the translation back to Brad in English so he wouldn't interrupt, but my delivery to Laurent was in flawless French. Every word was precise, my tone authoritative. I was no longer acting as a mere conduit. I was directly participating in a high-level engineering debate. Brad was practically catatonic. His eyes bulged as he looked at me, clearly wanting to shut me up, but absolutely terrified to open his mouth. Monsieur Laurent's eyes lit up brilliantly. He turned and engaged in a rapid-fire, hushed debate with his technical advisor. They pointed at the blueprint, exchanging rapid technical assessments. A few minutes later, Laurent looked back up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of immense curiosity and deep professional appreciation. "Mademoiselle, this is an incredibly bold and highly professional proposition. Why, then, was this solution entirely omitted from your official technical report?" I knew this was the trap. If I told him the truth that the American management was too cowardly and risk-averse to include it, it would make our entire branch look incompetent. I offered a calm, perfectly calculated smile. "We view this as a high-performance, premium alternative reserved strictly for our most visionary and strategic partners. Therefore, our intention was to present this data to you in person, to facilitate a direct, high-level discussion about its exclusive potential." The explanation was not only perfectly logical, but it subtly stroked his corporate ego. Monsieur Laurent paused for a moment, then let out a booming, genuine laugh. Excellent. Truly excellent. I admire your directness and your sharp intelligence. The temperature in the room instantly shifted from a freezing interrogation to a warm, collaborative partnership. For the next hour, the meeting went smoother than anyone could have possibly dreamed. I didn't just flawlessly translate the dialogue. Drawing on my encyclopedic knowledge of the discarded files they had forced me to archive, I injected crucial technical data at key leverage points. I also used natural pauses in the conversation to subtly guide Brad on French corporate etiquette, reminding him that the Parisian team valued long-term strategic synergy over quick quarterly profits. Brad transitioned from absolute terror to a state of manic euphoria. He barely had to think. He just listened to my English summaries, nodded enthusiastically, and let me handle the heavy lifting. He was looking at me like I was a winning lottery ticket he had just found in the trash. Outside the conference room, through the glass, Madison's facial expressions were a live broadcast of a mental breakdown. She went from smug anticipation of my failure to sheer denial to a sickly, pale shade of green envy, and finally settled on a look of absolute, ash-gray despair. She glared at me, her eyes so full of toxic hatred I was surprised the glass did not shatter. When the meeting finally adjourned, Monsieur Laurent stood up and initiated a warm, firm handshake with me. Miss Kendra, your talent is truly exceptional. I sincerely expect that you will be the lead coordinator on this project moving forward. He then turned to Brad, who was grinning like an idiot, and spoke in heavily accented English. Director Vance, you have a truly phenomenal employee here. Brad's face flushed with triumph. He nodded vigorously, playing the part of the proud mentor. I withdrew my hand and offered a polite nod. Thank you for your confidence, sir. Inside, I felt no overwhelming joy, no tears of validation. I only felt the cold, hard clarity of a survivor who had just weathered a massive storm. I knew that, starting today, the corporate hierarchy of this office had fundamentally shifted. Word of the meeting's massive success spread through the office ecosystem like a wildfire. Before 30 minutes had passed, every cubicle knew what had happened. When I finally walked out of the conference room, the sea of employees literally parted for me. I was met with a complex barrage of stares. There was shock, there was newfound awe, and there was bitter, festering jealousy. But the overt, naked racism and mockery from earlier, completely eradicated. I was suddenly the main character of the Chicago branch. Wow, Kendra, you are incredible. You really hid your power level, huh? Yeah, seriously. Where did you learn to speak French like that? You have to tell us your secret. One of the project managers, a white guy who had literally pretended I did not exist yesterday, suddenly appeared with a fresh cup of artisan coffee, smiling so hard his face looked like it might crack. I took the coffee, gave a sterile, polite thank you, and walked silently back to my desk. It was the same isolated desk in the darkest corner, but now it felt like a massive spotlight was beaming directly onto it. Every eye tracked my movements. Madison did not approach me. She sat rigidly at her desk, her back turned to me. But the stiff, tense set of her shoulders broadcasted the absolute meltdown happening inside her head. I overheard her hissing at one of her work besties near the printer. Hide her power level. Give me a break. She got lucky. I bet she stalked the delegation's LinkedIn profiles, memorized a few French corporate buzzwords, and just regurgitated them. There is no way she understands the engineering specs. Just wait. She is a total fraud. The second she has to actually manage the project, she is going to crash and burn. The rumors started mutating instantly, spreading through internal networks and hushed whispers. I did not care. I had learned a long time ago that in corporate America, the weakest defense is a verbal explanation. Raw, undeniable competence was the only currency that mattered. Later that afternoon, Brad's assistant came to my desk. He politely informed me that the director wanted to see me in his corner office. When I walked in, Brad practically leaped out of his ergonomic leather chair. His face was plastered with a benevolent, paternal smile that I had never seen directed at me before. "Kendra, come in, come in. Have a seat." He personally poured me a cup of premium organic tea, the rich aroma a sharp contrast to the toxic sludge I usually drank. "I really cannot thank you enough for today. You saved the entire department. On behalf of the company and the sales division, I want to express my deepest gratitude." He rubbed his hands together, his tone so dripping with fake sincerity that if I hadn't spent the last 3 months watching him treat me like dirt, I might have actually believed he valued me. "You are too kind, Brad. I was just doing my job," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Right. A team player. Outstanding." He waved his hand dismissively, then leaned across his massive desk, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to probe me. "So, Kendra, I have to ask, where exactly did you learn to speak French like that? Do you have family in Europe?" He was digging. His inherent bias could not comprehend how a black woman from a state school could possess a skill that rivaled elite European executives. He was searching for a logical explanation that fit his worldview. I picked up the teacup, gently blowing on the surface. The steam briefly fogged my thick glasses. "Nothing that exciting," I replied casually. "I just always loved the language. Self-taught mostly. I watched a lot of French cinema, listened to the news, and it just stuck." The answer was deliberately mundane, but it hit him like a ton of bricks. For someone to achieve that level of native fluency out of pure personal interest implied either a terrifying level of genius or an unbreakable, relentless work ethic. Either reality was deeply intimidating to a man who relied entirely on his golf handicap for networking. Brad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning wider than before. He launched into a massive monologue about how much he admired my drive, promising that I would see a very generous bonus this quarter, and that my future at this company was incredibly bright. I just sat there, sipping the tea, nodding at the appropriate intervals. I did not believe a single syllable coming out of his mouth. I knew perfectly well that he did not value Kendra the person. He valued the tool sitting in front of him that could extract millions of dollars from the French delegation. The moment I stepped out of his office, the official email dropped. I was immediately promoted and placed in full, autonomous charge of managing the French integration project. That email hit the sales floor like a tactical nuke. A junior coordinator, 3 months in, who was widely considered a diversity hire, was now the lead on the most lucrative contract in the company's fiscal year. This was an unprecedented disruption of the corporate hierarchy. During the afternoon alignment meeting, when Brad formally announced the shift, Madison was the very first person to jump to her feet. "Brad, I have to formally object to this," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Kendra is a junior employee. She has 0 project management experience at this level. Handing her the reins on a Tier 1 account is a massive liability. I strongly suggest that I take point on the integration. I have successfully managed international accounts before, and I actually have the seniority." She stared Brad down, using her typical aggressive entitlement to try and bully her way to the top. Immediately, her little faction chimed in. "Yeah, Brad, Madison is right. We need to mitigate risk here. Kendra is great at translating. We can keep her on as a support contractor, but giving her the actual lead is reckless." Brad's face darkened. The only thing echoing in his hollow head was Monsieur Laurent's direct demand. "I expect that she will be the lead coordinator." Brad had zero patience for Madison's internal political games when his own neck was on the line. Enough, he slammed his hand on the boardroom table. The room went dead silent. Do we secure this contract or not? The entire deal hinges on our communication with Paris. You all saw what Kendra did today. The decision is final. She is the project lead. Everyone in this room will provide her with full support. If I find out anyone is trying to undermine this project, you will be answering directly to HR. He delivered the warning to the room, but his eyes were locked entirely on Madison. Her face flushed deep crimson, then drained to a sickly white. She glared at me with a hatred so pure it was almost radioactive. She slowly sat down, but I knew the war was far from over. In the dark, toxic underbelly of this corporate office, a new strategy was already forming. The very next day, I needed a massive historical data dossier regarding our previous European vendor partnerships. Standard operating procedure dictated that the department assistant should have prepared and transferred this file to me by 9 a.m. By noon, I still had nothing. When I cornered the assistant, he looked terrified and stammered that Madison had requisitioned the master file for review. I walked straight to Madison's desk. Madison, I need the historical vendor dossier. I kept my tone perfectly flat and professional. She did not even bother to look up from her monitor. She casually examined her manicured nails. Oh, that file, I am currently auditing it. You are just going to have to wait. She brushed me off like I was a pest. I stood there for 10 full minutes. She didn't do a single piece of work. She scrolled through a designer handbag website, sipping an iced latte, and gossiping with a coworker about weekend plans. I was treated like thin air. I knew exactly what this was. This was the first microaggression of her new campaign. She was establishing dominance. She wanted the entire floor to see that even though I had the title, she, the senior white woman, still held the power to stonewall me. I did not raise my voice. I did not give her the satisfaction of an angry reaction. I turned around and walked back to my desk. The anger was a slow burning furnace in my chest, but I forced myself to swallow it down. I opened my browser and began executing complex database queries. If she thought hiding one internal document was going to stop me, she was incredibly naive. That evening, the office emptied out. By 10 p.m., the only illumination on the floor came from my desk lamp. I was leveraging every connection I had from my language immersion forums, cross-referencing public corporate filings, and slowly, painstakingly rebuilding the missing data from scratch. Around 11 p.m., as I was finally packing up, I noticed a light on in the IT department. Someone was furiously typing away. It was Marcus, a senior systems engineer. He was a quiet, brilliant black man who kept entirely to himself. More importantly, he was one of the very few people in this entire building who had never once participated in the racist jokes about me. I walked over and gently tapped on his doorframe. He looked up, adjusting his glasses, surprised to see me. "You are still here?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Yeah, I had to manually rebuild some missing data," I replied, nodding. He stared at his screen for a moment, then spoke without looking at me. Around 4 p.m. today, I saw Madison run a physical copy of that dossier through the scanner, and then she locked the master hard copy in her personal filing cabinet. My heart sank. She wasn't auditing it. This was deliberate, calculated sabotage. If I had failed to produce the preliminary briefing the next morning, I would have looked completely incompetent in front of Paris, and she would have swooped in to save the day. I understand. I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of solidarity. "Thank you, Marcus. I mean it." He just waved his hand dismissively and dove back into his code. In that moment, a wave of warmth broke through the ice-cold isolation I had felt for months. In this toxic wasteland, I actually had an ally. The next morning, During the project kickoff meeting, I stood at the front of the room and delivered a flawless, hyper-detailed preliminary briefing. I didn't just cover the missing historical data. I executed a deep dive into potential supply chain risks and presented highly specific mitigation strategies. Brad nodded enthusiastically the entire time, practically drooling over the metrics. Madison sat in the back, her face rigid like a gargoyle. Her brain was clearly short-circuiting. Without the master file, she could not fathom how I had built such a comprehensive presentation overnight. All the aggressive, undermining questions she had prepared to humiliate me were rendered completely useless. Watching her seethe in absolute impotence was the most satisfying moment of my entire week. I looked at her, my face a mask of professional calm. I knew this was only the opening skirmish. She was not going to stop. The color had drained completely from her face. Her meticulously planned corporate gaslighting had hit a brick wall. After the meeting, she practically sprinted out of the room, dropping her facade of polite professionalism. I calmly gathered my notes, Marcus's warning echoing in my mind. Locking the file in her drawer meant she had escalated from petty delays to active sabotage. I shifted my defensive posture to maximum. This project was not just a resume builder for me. It was the only thing standing between my mother and medical bankruptcy. It was my anchor in this city. Anyone trying to destroy this project was declaring total war on my family. When my shift ended, I purposefully went down to the coffee shop on the ground floor. I sat by the window. At 5:30, I watched Madison and her clique exit the building, laughing as they climbed into an Uber. Only when I was absolutely certain she had left the premises did I return to the office. I didn't go near her desk. That would be an amateur mistake. I went straight to my workstation and performed a hard, encrypted backup of all my files to my personal, secured cloud server. Then I set a secondary, invisible credential lock on the local master files on my hard drive, disguising it as a standard system update. Having secured my perimeter, I finally went home. On the train ride, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, "Watch your local drive." I replied, handled. I knew exactly what he meant. If she couldn't beat me in the light, she was going to strike in the dark. And my physical workstation was the most obvious target. Sure enough, the moment I stepped off the elevator the next morning, the energy on the floor was distinctly predatory. A few of the senior coordinators were giving me sideways glances, a mix of pity and barely concealed glee. I walked to my desk, my heart rate steadying into a combat rhythm. Someone had been at my station. It was subtle, but the angle of my mouse pad and the alignment of my keyboard were off by a fraction of an inch. I said nothing. I sat down, booted up my machine, and entered my password. Everything looked perfectly normal. I began my morning routine as if I suspected nothing. At exactly 10 a.m., Brad called me into his office. His face was thunderous. "Kendra, what the hell is this budget alignment you sent me last night?" I paused, projecting polite confusion. "Is there a discrepancy, Brad? A discrepancy?" He slammed a printed spreadsheet onto his desk. "Look at it yourself. The decimal points on the entire materials budget have been shifted. Do you know what this means? It means our entire pricing proposal to Paris is 10 times lower than our actual cost. If I had forwarded this without catching it, the company would have taken a catastrophic loss." I picked up the printout. He was right. The decimals were shifted perfectly. $1 million line item was now $100,000. This was a terminal error. The kind of mistake that gets you fired for cause instantly. My brain analyzed the vector of attack. My cloud backup was pristine. This meant someone had physically accessed my machine and altered the local file right before the automated email script sent it to Brad. That someone was Madison. "Look at me, Kendra. I didn't give you this opportunity for you to treat it like a joke. This is amateur hour. How could the lead project coordinator be this unbelievably reckless? His rage was authentic, and it was entirely directed at me. In his eyes, my brilliance yesterday was a fluke, and today I was just a sloppy, incompetent diversity hire who couldn't manage a basic Excel sheet. I can prove this was tampered with, I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that immediately silenced his rant. I always mirror my local files to a secured cloud server. I have the pristine original, and the metadata will show exactly when the local file was corrupted. Fine, show me, right now. Brad barked, waving his hand impatiently. I walked back to my desk. Half the floor, sensing the blood in the water, had congregated to watch the execution. I saw Madison watching from the periphery, a tiny, smug smile playing on her lips. She thought she had completely overwritten the file history. She thought I was cornered. I woke up my monitor and opened the local file directory. I right-clicked on the budget spreadsheet and opened the Properties tab. The last modified timestamp read 1:23 a.m. today. Now, building security protocols dictated that the HVAC and main power grid shut down at 10 p.m. At midnight, the internal network switches were disabled. Unless someone was sitting in the pitch-black office, working offline at 1 a.m., this timestamp was physically impossible for my schedule. I didn't announce this yet. I simply opened the corrupted file, showing the altered decimals. I heard the collective intake of breath from the peanut gallery. Madison actually let out a small, fake gasp of shock. My face remained a mask of stone. I closed the local file, opened my browser, and logged into my encrypted cloud drive. I downloaded the mirrored backup and opened its properties. Last modified, 9:30 p.m. yesterday. I opened the file. The budget was flawless. The decimals were exactly where they belonged. I dragged the two windows side by side, displaying them on my large monitor. The sabotage was undeniable. Brad, I recommend you look at this, I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the silent floor. Brad pushed his way through the crowd. He stared at the dual monitors. His anger rapidly morphed into deep, paranoid confusion. "What exactly am I looking at?" he demanded. "It is very straightforward," I said, standing up and sweeping my gaze across the crowd until it locked dead onto Madison, whose face was rapidly losing color. Last night at 9:30 p.m., I backed up the pristine, finalized budget to my cloud. The file residing on my local hard drive was maliciously altered at 1:23 a.m. this morning. Someone intentionally corrupted the financial data and set me up to take the fall. The silence was deafening. Every head swiveled slowly from my monitor to Madison. She stood frozen, her lips trembling, the smugness completely erased. You are paranoid. Who's to say you didn't alter it yourself at 1 a.m. to create some kind of drama?" She stammered, her voice shrill and defensive. Whether it is paranoia or not is easily verifiable by the security logs. A calm, deep voice cut through the tension. Marcus materialized from the hallway. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Brad. "Due to compliance regulations, we have 24/7 high-definition surveillance on this floor. All we have to do is pull the physical access logs and the camera footage from 1 a.m. to see exactly whose keycard was in the building." Marcus's statement was the kill shot. Madison's knees actually buckled. She had to grab the edge of a cubicle to keep from collapsing. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. Brad's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He was not a smart man, but he wasn't blind either. The reality of the situation was crystal clear. "Madison, my office." Now, he practically spat the words. Madison was escorted away by two of her friends, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her go, feeling zero triumph. only a cold, hollow exhaustion. Corporate America was a fundamentally vicious place, far dirtier and more sociopathic than I had ever anticipated. For the next 20 minutes, muffled shouting and hysterical crying echoed from Brad's office. The sales floor was paralyzed. I sat back down, logged into my email, attached the correct budget, and sent it to Brad, copying the relevant engineering teams. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the sheer weight of the mental toll. I didn't want to play these Machiavellian games. I just wanted to do my job, pay for my mother's chemotherapy, and exist in peace. But the system was designed to crush people like me unless we fought back with brutal precision. Eventually, Brad's door opened. Madison walked out, her face blotchy and mascara running down her cheeks. As she passed my desk, she stopped for a fraction of a second. She leveled a glare at me that was so profoundly toxic it felt like a physical weight. There was no remorse, only pure, venomous hatred. She blamed me for her exposure. In her twisted mind of white privilege, this project belonged to her by right, and I was the usurper who had stolen her throne. The official disciplinary action was quietly circulated by HR later that afternoon. Madison was cited for severe lack of professional judgment. Her quarterly bonus was revoked, and she received a formal written reprimand. However, the actual sabotage, the tampering with financial documents, was conveniently swept under the rug. Brad clearly wanted to avoid a massive internal scandal that would make his department look like a circus. It was a classic corporate slap on the wrist for the Golden Girl. I accepted it. For now, it seemed Madison had been neutralized. I drastically underestimated her sociopathy. Her first attempt failed, so she decided to burn the entire building down. A week later, I was preparing for the most critical milestone of the project, the primary video conference with the Parisian Executive Board. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. At 2:45, I had compiled all my documentation and was preparing to head up to the executive boardroom on the top floor, which was equipped with the high-end teleconferencing gear. Just as I stood up, Claire, the executive assistant to the CEO, a woman who possessed the warmth of a glacier, marched up to my desk. Her heels clicked with military precision. "Kendra, come with me immediately." Her tone left absolutely no room for discussion. "Claire, I have the Paris Executive Summit in 15 minutes, I said, genuinely confused. "The CEO requires your presence right now." She turned on her heel, expecting me to follow. The CEO, Mr. Sterling. I had only seen him in the distance during my orientation. Why would the CEO intervene 5 minutes before a multi-million-dollar international summit? A cold dread pooled in my stomach. I had no choice. I followed Claire through the labyrinthine executive corridors to the massive corner suite. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the atmosphere inside was an execution chamber. CEO Sterling sat behind a mahogany desk, his face grim. Next to him sat Greg, the Director of Human Resources. "Have a seat," Kendra, Sterling commanded. "We have received an anonymous, high-priority whistleblower report. It alleges that you committed a catastrophic error on translated company literature, severely damaging our corporate reputation abroad." He slid a thin manila folder across the desk. I opened it, and my blood ran ice cold. Inside was a printed copy of a French introductory brochure. It was a task I had done as a favor for Madison during my second week here, when she was hazing me with busy work. Because I was rushed, I had accidentally used a localized comma format instead of the proper French decimal syntax in one specific paragraph. It was a microscopic error. Furthermore, I had caught the error myself 2 hours later, corrected it, and uploaded the pristine version to the server. But here it was, 2 months later. The original, flawed draft had been exhumed, branded as a liability, and anonymously sent directly to the CEO. The timing was a masterpiece of corporate assassination. According to our zero-tolerance policy for gross negligence affecting international branding, we are required to launch a formal investigation and implement an immediate suspension. Greg from HR stated, reading from a corporate script. Therefore, effective immediately, Kendra, you are suspended from all duties related to the Paris integration project pending the outcome of this inquiry. Suspended. My brain short-circuit. It is 2:55 p.m. The executive summit with Paris starts in 5 minutes. I am the sole architect of the technical integration strategy. I hold the entire framework in my head. Pulling the project lead 5 minutes before the kickoff is corporate suicide. This was not about punishing me for a typo. This was Madison Kamikaze bombing the entire multi-million-dollar contract just to ensure I went down in the flames. She was willing to bankrupt the company's quarter just to ruin a black woman who had outperformed her. Mr. Sterling, the summit with Paris begins in 5 minutes. I forced my voice to remain steady, suppressing the tidal wave of panic. If I am not in that room, Director Vance will handle the summit. Sterling cut me off, his voice absolute zero. Your only priority right now is to cooperate with this HR investigation. He gave me no quarter. The sheer injustice of the corporate machine was suffocating. I was trapped in this room, completely stripped of my agency, while the project I built was about to be butchered by Brad's incompetence. I could visualize Brad sweating through his suit, stammering while Monsieur Laurent stared at him in disgust. Everything I had bled for, my leverage, my mother's medical funds, was about to be annihilated by an anonymous HR complaint. My fingernails dug into my palms until the skin broke. The rage was a physical pressure in my skull, but I knew that if I showed an ounce of emotion, if I raised my voice even slightly, Greg from HR would immediately document me as aggressive and unstable. I had to remain an iceberg. The interrogation began. The room felt like a vacuum. Kendra, regarding this critical syntax error, do you have an explanation? Greg asked, his voice devoid of any human empathy. I took a deep, controlled breath, denying it would be foolish. Yes, I made that typographical error, I said flatly. Both of them blinked, clearly surprised that I wasn't launching into a hysterical defense. But I continued, my voice gaining a sharp, metallic edge. I have 3 critical points of clarification. First, this document was translated during my 2nd week of employment, under extreme duress, as an off-the-books request from Madison. I had exactly 1 hour to complete it while juggling my actual onboarding tasks. I am not deflecting blame, but I am establishing context. Second, and most importantly, this specific draft was entirely internal. It was never published, never printed, and never seen by a client. Less than 2 hours after I generated it, specifically at 4:15 p.m. on that date, I identified the syntax error myself, corrected it, and uploaded the finalized, pristine version to the shared departmental drive. The document you are holding is a discarded draft that I personally tagged for deletion 2 months ago. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out my laptop, and booted it up. I turned the screen to face them. I pulled up the server logs. 2:10 p.m., draft created. 4:15 p.m., finalized version uploaded, draft marked for archive. Third, I leaned forward, resting my hands on the mahogany desk, holding the CEO's gaze. I find it deeply concerning that a whistleblower was so dedicated to company integrity that they bypassed the pristine, finalized document on the public server, aggressively mined the deleted archives for a 2-month-old draft, and then held on to it until exactly 10 minutes before the most critical international summit of the fiscal year to send it directly to your desk. I let the silence hang for a second. Is this a genuine concern about a comma? Or is this a targeted, malicious act of corporate sabotage designed explicitly to derail the Paris integration. I strongly advise HR to investigate the motive behind this anonymous tip. I was no longer the defendant. I had seized control of the narrative and pivoted the charge from a typo to high-level corporate treason. Greg's face went slack. He was an HR drone, entirely unequipped to handle a counterattack of this magnitude. Sterling's eyes narrowed. The irritation in his posture vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a predatory CEO. He tapped his expensive pen against the desk, processing the logic. Before he could speak, a sharp knock hit the door. The door opened, and Marcus stepped into the room. He didn't look intimidated by the executive suite in the slightest. "Mr. Sterling, I am here to provide evidentiary support for Kendra," Marcus said, his voice steady. Greg looked appalled. "This is a closed HR proceeding." Marcus ignored him, walking over to the conference monitor and plugging in his secure tablet. "As a senior systems engineer, I monitor anomalous data extraction. The server logs verify everything Kendra just stated. But more importantly," he tapped his screen, and a data log projected onto the wall. At 11:47 p.m. last night, a user logged into the network via remote VPN. They bypassed the active project folders, manually accessed the deep archive, and downloaded the specific deleted draft you are holding. The user completely ignored the corrected, finalized file. The IP address and the credential token belonged to Madison. The logs were indisputable. The timestamp, the user ID, the exact file path, it was a digital smoking gun. The room fell into a deathly silence. Greg from HR started sweating profusely. An investigation he thought would be a quick termination had just uncovered a massive internal conspiracy. I looked at Marcus. He had risked his own neck, violating protocol, to pull this data for me. He didn't say a word, but the solidarity was absolute. I turned back to Sterling. The ball was in his court. He had authorized this witch hunt based on a lie. How was he going to fix it? Sterling stared at the projected logs. His face was a mask of cold fury. The silence stretched for a full 60 seconds. Finally, he looked at Greg. "The investigation into Kendra is officially closed and expunged," Sterling barked. "HR will immediately launch a full-spectrum audit into this whistleblower report. This company will not tolerate malicious internal sabotage disguised as compliance. Whoever weaponized this process will be terminated." Greg practically tripped over himself, nodding. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." Sterling then turned to me. The coldness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, appraising respect. "Kendra, that was exceptional work." He stood up, remaining totally objective under fire, providing irrefutable data, and uncovering a threat to the company. "Your professionalism is exactly what we need at the top level." The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest finally evaporated. I did not smile. I gave a single, professional nod. "Thank you for your objectivity, Mr. Sterling." He glanced at his Rolex and cursed under his breath. "What time is it? The Paris summit." "It is currently 3:15 p.m. We are 15 minutes late," I replied calmly. "Unacceptable." He grabbed his suit jacket. "You are coming with me. I am personally sitting in on this summit." He pulled out his phone as we marched down the hall. "Brad, it's Sterling. Shut up and stop talking to them. Kendra is walking in right now." "Yes, she is with me." He hung up. As we walked past the IT sector, I caught Marcus's eye and gave him a subtle, profound nod of gratitude. He returned it and went back to his screens. When Sterling and I breached the doors of the sales department, the entire floor froze. Every employee watched in stunned silence as the CEO of the company personally escorted the black junior coordinator, who was supposedly just fired, right into the executive boardroom. It was a massive, public display of untouchable corporate power. Madison was sitting at her desk. When she saw me walking shoulder to shoulder with Sterling, all the blood left her face. She physically slumped in her ergonomic chair, looking like she had been hit by a sniper. She knew it was over. We walked into the boardroom. Brad was drenched in sweat, his tie loosened, looking like he was about to pass out. He was stammering incoherently at the massive monitor where Monsieur Laurent sat, looking absolutely furious. When Brad saw Sterling and me, he practically collapsed in relief. Sterling took the center chair, looked directly into the camera, and spoke in flawless, commanding English. Monsieur Laurent, I sincerely apologize for the delay. We were finalizing a major internal restructuring to ensure this project receives the exact resources it demands. Sterling gestured to me. Allow me to formally introduce Kendra. Effective immediately, Kendra is no longer just the project lead. I have promoted her to Director of International Partnerships. She possesses total executive authority over this account. Her compensation has been adjusted to reflect this executive mandate. The boardroom was dead silent. Brad's jaw actually dropped open. On the screen, Monsieur Laurent looked stunned for a moment, and then a massive smile broke across his face. He actually clapped his hands. A brilliant talent must be given the proper authority. Mr. Sterling, a phenomenal executive decision. I stood there, my mind racing. From being suspended and investigated by HR to being promoted to a director-level executive with a doubled salary, all in the span of 30 minutes. I looked at Sterling. He gave me a look that communicated absolute trust and a silent apology for the HR debacle. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of professional confidence I possessed, and sat down at the table. Monsieur Laurent, I apologize for keeping you waiting. Let us begin the integration review. In that exact moment, I knew my era in this company had officially begun. Becoming the Director of International Partnerships completely altered my reality. I was moved out of the cubicle farm and into a massive corner office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The glass and steel monuments to corporate power were no longer things I looked up at from the gutter. I was sitting inside one of them, wielding my own power. The HR memo regarding my promotion, conveniently released at the exact same time as a memo detailing a severe, unnamed disciplinary restructuring in the sales department, sent shockwaves through the company. My ascent was meteoric, and Madison's fall from grace was brutal. No one dared to whisper about my resume anymore. No one questioned my degree. The overt disrespect vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of cautious fear and desperate networking. They finally realized that in the ruthless ecosystem of corporate America, race, privilege, and pedigree could only shield you for so long against overwhelming, undeniable competence. I threw myself into the Paris integration. Armed with Sterling's blank check of authority, I ruthlessly optimized the project. I stripped away Brad's useless bureaucratic layers. I utilized my deep understanding of French corporate culture to establish direct, highly efficient channels with the Parisian engineering teams. Every metric I delivered was flawless. Every strategy was perfectly optimized. During a video call, Monsieur Laurent chuckled and said, "Kendra, I think you understand our corporate vision better than my own board of directors." I wasn't just a translator. I was the absolute linchpin of a multinational merger. With my new salary, my personal life transformed. I ditched the thick glasses for premium contacts. I bought bespoke, tailored suits that fit me perfectly. The first time I walked into the executive washroom and looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the powerful, commanding black woman staring back at me. Confidence is a weapon, and I was fully armed. When I walked the halls, senior managers who used to ignore me now stepped aside and offered polite greetings. Director Kendra. Brad Vance practically became my assistant. He hovered around my office, desperately trying to attach his name to my success. I treated him with icy, professional distance. I didn't seek revenge, but I certainly didn't offer him grace. He was just a cog in my machine now. Marcus and I became close allies. We took our breaks together in the executive lounge. He translated complex IT architecture for me, and I ensured his department received the budget increases they deserved. In a building full of corporate sharks, he was the only genuine friend I had. My mother's medical situation stabilized. I moved her to a premier oncology center. The crushing weight of poverty was finally lifting. I assumed Madison had been thoroughly defeated. I assumed the nightmare was over. I was wrong. I fundamentally underestimated the psychotic depths of white corporate entitlement. Madison's life in the office was a living hell. Stripped of her bonus and her status, she was radioactive. Her former clique abandoned her. Every day she came into the office, she looked more hollowed out, more bitter. But she refused to quit. Instead, the light in her eyes was replaced by a dark, obsessive, homicidal hatred directed entirely at me. The project was entering its final phase. The master integration blueprint was finalized. This document was the Holy Grail. It contained proprietary trade secrets that would dictate the company's trajectory for the next decade. I kept it heavily encrypted, stored exclusively on my local secure drive. One evening, I stayed late to finalize the financial projections. At 10 p.m., I locked my workstation and headed for the elevator. As I passed the server room, Marcus stepped out. He handed me a tiny, unmarked USB drive. "Take this," he said quietly. "What is it?" "A proprietary Ghost executable I coded," he replied. "Plug it in. If anyone breaches your local machine, it bypasses the OS, activates the webcam, and runs a stealth screen capture." Untraceable, I stared at him. The paranoia spiked. "You think she is still trying?" He didn't answer, he just looked at me. I took the drive, thank you. I went back to my corner office, plugged it in, and ran the script. It vanished into the background registry. I went home. 2 days passed in complete silence. The project was practically finished. Friday afternoon rolled around. Management had scheduled a mandatory, building-wide fire drill. The alarms blared, and the entire staff was evacuated to the plaza downstairs. I locked my office door and joined the crowd. During the head count, I casually scanned the sales department. Madison was missing. Tyler mentioned she had severe cramps and ran to the restroom right before the alarm. A spike of pure adrenaline hit my heart. The drill lasted 20 minutes. The second the all-clear sounded, I bypassed the elevators, sprinted up the fire stairs, and burst onto the executive floor. I approached my office. The biometric lock was green. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. Everything looked identical to how I left it. I sat down and touched the mouse. The screen woke up. I immediately triggered Marcus's hidden executable and pulled up the ghost logs. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. The video log opened. 5 minutes after the fire alarms went off, the video showed my office door sliding open. A master override keycard had been used. Madison crept into the room. Her face was sweating, her eyes wide with a terrifying, manic desperation. She jammed a flash drive into my tower. She ran a brute force script to bypass my screensaver, accessed my encrypted folders, and found the master integration blueprint. A psychotic, victorious smile stretched across her face. She copied the entire proprietary directory to her flash drive. Then, she opened my original files and began deleting massive chunks of the algorithms, attempting to corrupt the master copy beyond repair. She pulled her drive, wiped the desk with her sleeve, and sneaked out. This was no longer office politics. This was a felony. This was corporate espionage and grand larceny. She wanted to steal the project, sabotage my presentation, and present the stolen files as her own backup to save the day. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. The rage was apocalyptic. I closed my eyes and breathed. Then, I copied the entire ghost log, the video, and the system diagnostics onto my secure phone. Madison, you dug your own grave. I am going to bury you in it. Monday morning. The Chicago sun was shining. I arrived at 8 a.m., 30 minutes early. I didn't go to my office. I walked straight to the CEO's suite. Claire looked up, startled. Director Kendra, Mr. Sterling isn't in yet. I will wait, I said, my voice vibrating with lethal calm. I sat on the leather sofa. My mind was a steel trap. At 8:50 a.m., Sterling stepped off the private elevator. He looked surprised. Kendra, what brings you up here so early? I stood up, Mr. Sterling. I have a Tier 1 security breach that requires your immediate, personal intervention. It involves the theft of corporate trade secrets. His corporate persona vanished. My office. Now. I walked in, plugged my phone into his secure monitor, and hit play on the ghost log. We stood in silence as the high-definition footage showed Madison bypassing the locks, stealing the proprietary blueprints, and maliciously corrupting the company's multi-million-dollar IP. Sterling's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. The temperature in the room plummeted. When did this happen? He asked, his voice a lethal whisper. Friday afternoon, during the evacuation drill. Sterling leaned back, his eyes closed, processing the catastrophic liability. If I took this to the Chicago PD, Madison would be indicted for corporate espionage. But the company's stock would tank from the scandal. He opened his eyes and looked at me. He was handing me the executioner's axe. Kendra, how do you want to handle this? I looked him dead in the eye. I have 3 non-negotiable demands. 1. Madison is terminated for cause, effective immediately. 0 tolerance. 2. Our legal department drafts a comprehensive NDA and a blacklisting memo to be quietly circulated among our industry partners. She never works in this sector again. 3. This is executed today. I will not tolerate a corporate spy on my floor for another 60 seconds. Sterling nodded slowly. It was a brutal, flawless corporate execution. He picked up his phone. HR, legal, and security. My office. 5 minutes. Bring Madison. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Madison walked in, flanked by 2 massive security guards. When she saw me standing next to the CEO, she flinched, but quickly arranged her face into a mask of victimhood. Mr. Sterling, is there a problem? She asked sweetly. Sterling didn't speak. He just tapped the spacebar on his keyboard. The high-definition video of her committing a felony played on the massive wall monitor. Every ounce of blood drained from her body. Her mouth fell open. She started shaking violently. No. That's edited. I was just... The head of legal stepped forward. Madison, you are in violation of your NDA, your employment contract, and federal trade secret laws. You are terminated immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects, and then you will be removed from the premises. If you contest this, we will hand this footage directly to the FBI. The reality hit her like a freight train. No. Please, she lunged forward, grabbing the edge of Sterling's desk, sobbing hysterically. Please, Mr. Sterling, I was just stressed. I made a mistake. Give me another chance. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, her white privilege completely shattered. Kendra, please, tell them I'm sorry. I looked down at her. My face was carved from stone. I felt absolutely nothing. You planted the seeds, Madison. Now harvest the crop. I turned my back to her. The security guards grabbed her by the arms and physically dragged her out of the executive suite. Her screams echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors closed. It was over. Madison's departure purged the toxicity from the building. The Paris integration launched flawlessly. It was the most profitable quarter in the company's history. The company hosted a massive, opulent gala at a downtown Chicago hotel to celebrate. Under the chandeliers, wearing a stunning designer gown, I stood on the main stage and accepted the Executive Excellence Award from Sterling, along with a bonus check that had enough zeros to change my life permanently. Cameras flashed. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Brad Vance scurried up to me, holding 2 glasses of champagne, bowing like a servant. "Director Kendra, I always knew you had it in you. Let's toast to your genius." I took the glass, gave him a cold, empty smile, and walked away. I slipped out to the hotel balcony. The cool Chicago wind whipped through my hair. I pulled out my phone, logged into my banking app, and wired the entirety of my massive bonus directly to the oncology center. I called the head doctor, Dr. Evans. "Implement the premium treatment protocol for my mother. The account is fully funded." The doctor confirmed. I hung up the phone, looking out at the glittering grid of the city. For the first time in months, a single tear tracked down my cheek. The humiliation, the rage, the exhaustion, it was all worth it. My phone buzzed. An international number. Paris, I answered. "Hello, Mademoiselle Kendra," it was Monsieur Laurent. His voice was booming and cheerful. I switched to flawless French. "Bonjour, Monsieur Laurent. Kendra, the board is absolutely astounded by your performance. I am calling to offer you an official invitation. We want to fly you to Paris for a 6-month executive leadership immersion program at our global headquarters. All expenses paid. Your talent belongs on the global stage." Paris, a new empire to conquer. I gripped the railing, looking out at the horizon. 3 months ago, I was a joke to these people, a target for their racism and their insecurities. Now, I held the keys to the kingdom. I smiled into the phone. "Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Laurent. It would be my absolute honor." The greatest lesson I learned was that in corporate America, kindness is viewed as weakness, and explanations are viewed as guilt. But undeniable, lethal competence is an armor they cannot pierce. When you become the undisputed master of your domain, the very people who tried to destroy you will be forced to step aside and watch you ascend to the throne. This is my story.